Okay, so the last time I made a video on Wildbow's Worm, which I dubbed the best superhero story you've never heard of, it became my most successful video by far, even though the video itself sucked. I mean, I still stand by everything I said there, but the way I presented it and just the way I said things in general, kinda cringeworthy. Not that I've improved much since, but hey, baby steps, right? Anyway, in this video, I am talking about the sequel of Worm, which is Ward, aka the best superhero story you've never heard of, Part 2. So, without spoilers, what is the premise of Ward? So after the events in the climax of Worm, the Parahumans universe changed forever. Rules are rewritten, people's past are forgiven, and the main character, who I will not name due to spoilers, is trying to come to grips with their own dark past by reinventing themselves while at the same time trying to find a place in this new world. See? Very fake and no spoilers. Anyway, my name is Random Guy Reviews. I do reviews of books, movies, TV shows, and any other types of media that I consume. Usually I put them in this low effort, poorly edited YouTube videos I have on my channel. In this video, I am reviewing the web series or web serial or whatever you want to call it, Ward by Wildbow, the sequel to the kind of famous, but not really, Worm by Wildbow. So, yeah. First off, no, you can't read this without reading Worm. You can, but it would be very confusing and it would be a much worse reading experience for sure. So ideally, you would watch my terrible Worm video, go finish reading Worm, and then come back here. But still, I'm not gonna spoil anything from either book if you just wanna hear how it stands compared to Worm. Let's start with the inevitable comparison to Worm. No, Ward is not like Worm at all, despite the fact that it features a lot of the same characters. The main difference to me is the focus. Some people will say that Ward is slower paced and more boring, which is fair. I've felt that at some points as well, as Wildbow's tendency to meander during interludes are still there. Even if the interludes in general are a lot better this time, I feel like they are more unique and more focused. But in my perspective, while Worm is focused on large-scale escalations or engaging battle sequences, Ward is more of a character study, or characters study, plural. That is not to say that Worm had weak characterizations or Ward had no fantastically written fight scenes, because neither of those two things are true. In reality, these two just have slightly different focus as a whole. The character work in Ward is, I think, just very masterful. The pacing slows down because the narrative focuses more on the characters rather than what's happening in the world, which causes some parts of the world building to suffer. It is not quite as immersive, the world doesn't feel quite as real as Worm. One of Wildbow's web serial between Worm and Ward, which is Twig, was even more character focused than Ward, and I feel like Ward tried to strike a balance between Twig's character focusedness and Worm's never-ending escalations, but it kind of got lost somewhere in between. So about the characters in Ward are all damaged, fucked up people. Ward really showed how much Wildbow has improved as a writer, especially in terms of writing characters. This time they are all more diverse and dynamic. They struggle with many different things, some of which I could relate with, and I just love the way Wildbow handles this part of the story. None of the characters are even close to perfect or Mary Sue or whatever you wanna call it. There's depth to them that weren't there in many of the characters in Worm. Again, the slower pacing at the beginning probably have something to do with this, because it means that we can delve deeper into each character and know what their struggles are and what they do to go through those struggles. Characters' redemptions in general were handled really well as well. While Worm had one great redemption arc, Ward had several of them if I remember correctly. All of them are different from each other too, so it didn't seem repetitive. In short, their struggles and the way they overcome, or at least try to overcome them, is my favorite part of Ward. Seeing some of the characters that survived to the end of Ward and comparing them to the beginning of Ward, or even more so to the beginning of Worm, it's insane how much all of them have changed. In Worm, I didn't think that character development was one of Wildbow's strengths, but after Ward, I think it definitely is, at least in this specific story. I'm also one of the few who thinks that Ward's protagonist is better than Worm's. Ward's main character is just more engaging to me, and it's just more fun to read. Their perspective is a lot more dynamic, less one note, basically, is what I'm trying to say. The way their powers work at the beginning might not be as fun or challenging as Taylor's powers, but the evolution and change to what we got at the end of the story is really, really well done. Regarding the world building, I just feel like there's a lot of missed opportunities, things that seemed interesting and were introduced early on but never brought up again. There were a lot of things like that, basically. Looking at it from that point of view, Ward needs editing even more so than Worm, I think. Admittedly, the world building isn't all bad. The way the mythology around the entity or the powers work and evolved in Ward is super fascinating, and there are also a lot more cool powers compared to in Worm. For me personally, I think my main issue with Ward is the erratic pacing. What I said above about this being slow and more boring relative to Worm is mostly only true for the first half and near the end of the story. At first, it was jarring, expecting something like Worm and getting something that is so differently paced, so much so that I almost stopped reading altogether. But by the time I accepted that this was a different type of story, I think Wildbow might have listened to the criticism a bit too much, and he sped things up too much in the middle before backpedaling at the end with long-winded fights in the final few arcs. So many things happened in the span of a week that it became unrealistic and just strange if you actually think about it. For example, most of what happened in the last 4 arcs took place in 2 days, for example, and 4 arcs is a lot of words. A lot of things happened in just 2 days to the point that it became just weird, I guess. There's also one more issue, which is hard to convey without spoilers because it is something that happened in the middle of the climax of the story. But basically, Wildbow tried to do something different with a very common trope, like try to subvert it, I guess. Like he tried to subvert a superhero trope. However, he failed to properly communicate what he was doing, causing the community to perceive it as something that went directly against one of the core themes of the story. And since this is like a very important thing in the story, for a while I saw it as a huge misstep until it was resolved really well, like the next chapter. I think the fact that there are a 3-day gap between the chapters make it a lot worse than it would have been otherwise. Like for example, I think in a reread or if someone binge read it instead of reading one chapter every 3 days, it wouldn't have been such a big deal. So, it's really hard to say what exactly my conclusions are about this story. On one hand, I love a lot of it. I deeply, deeply loved every single thing about the main characters here. But like I said before, there are a lot of complaints as well. So it's difficult for me to rate it. But I don't think I regret reading this 1.7 million words behemoth. What I do know is that I will miss this universe. I will miss the characters, I will miss everything, especially because the Parahumans universe was a constant in my life for almost like 3 years at some point. So, it was nice having something to look forward to every Wednesday and Sunday because that's when the new chapters come in. But, I don't really have much to say. I think if I really had to rate it, it would be like a 4.5. Despite everything that I said, despite all the complaints that I had, I still think that it deserves that because the good things, especially the characters, really overshadows the bad things to me. So, to really conclude this, I wanna quote the final line of the story, which I think perfectly encapsulates what Ward is to me because that final line is what Ward is whenever I think about it. And that is a reminder that we press on no matter what, that there is always a way forward. Thanks for watching, and go read Worm, go read Ward, share it with your friends, and maybe it'll be even more successful in the future. I certainly hope so. But bye!